But the topic I want to talk with you about this morning, it's not financial aid, but it has some familiarity with finances, and that topic is investment. Investment. And when we talk about investment this morning, I want to talk about the idea of devoting resources towards something now with the hope of gaining a greater benefit from it later. The idea of devoting resources, sacrificing resources now with the idea and the hope of gaining a benefit from it later. You know, in Old Testament times, those were agricultural times. And so then, instead of talking about investment, they would have talked about the concept of sowing and reaping, right? You sow a seed today, and then you reap a harvest later. But because we live in more modern times, instead of using the concept of sowing and reaping, I really want to talk about this concept of investment. Now, when you think about investment, and as you heard, I was an accounting major. When you think about investment, normally we think about stocks, we think about bonds, we think about 401k, and so on and so forth. But I want to let you know that when we talk about investment, my first major serious encounter with investment came in a much different way. You see, I was 17 years old, and I was on my way to college. I was in the car with my father, and he was driving me to college, and it was my first time leaving home, and it was my first time being on my own. So I was excited because I was thinking about all of the freedom that I had and the possibilities that were ahead of me as I was on my way to college. Now, let me stop there for a second. Let me break this down for you because I realize I'm talking to Biola. So you may have missed what I just said. I attended a non-Christian school. And as I was going to college, I was not walking with the Lord. So as I was going to college, I was thinking about the freedom and the possibilities. You got it? On my way to college. Not the freedom and the responsibilities, but the freedom and the possibilities of going to college. So I'm in the car, I'm with my father, I'm excited, and we're on our way to school, and then my father hit me with my first major lesson on investment. And it went a little something like this. We're driving along, and I'm sitting next to my father, and my father then says to me, he says, "Now, son," he said, "we have 4 years of tuition for you. Over those 4 years, you can do whatever you want over those 4 years. But at the end of those 4 years, whether you've graduated or not, you're on your own." Say what? He said, "Yes, son, look, we have 4 years of tuition for you. So whatever you do with these 4 years is up to you, but when you get done, whether you graduate or not, you are on your own." Let me tell you what type of crisis this created in me. You see, when I was in high school, there were a couple of things. Number one, when I was in high school, I wasn't the greatest student. I wasn't one of these students who could just roll out of bed, roll into class, never having read anything, never having studied, and could ace the test. No, I was a student that needed to study hard in order to make the grade. But not only that, I was a student in high school who actually worked at McDonald's. Anybody ever worked at McDonald's or fast food before? All right. So for those of you who work fast food, you know that when you work fast food, you're in there flipping burgers, taking orders, and you're earning minimum wage. So while it was a great job at the time, well, actually, guys, no, it really wasn't a great job at the time. I would come home smelling like a cheeseburger, and there would be dogs that would be following me because they think there was a meal on the way. So it really wasn't a great time. But anyway, while it was great, having a job while I was in high school, I had no desire to have a chance to go to college, not finish college, and then only find myself afterwards flipping burgers all over again and earning minimum wage. So I was wrestling. I was wrestling with what my father told me. And that night I'm wrestling with the implications of my father's statement. I'm thinking, okay, let's see if I study hard, don't have that much fun, maybe graduate, then I can get a good job. But, if I go to college and I have fun, but don't really study that hard, and I don't graduate, I'll end up back at McDonald's. Which one is better? I'm not sure. I'm sitting here wrestling with that night, but then another and even scarier thought hit me, and this is one that solidified in me this meaning of the concept of investment. And that thought was this, guys. That thought was, whatever I do for the next 4 years will determine the course of the rest of my life. Whatever I did for those 4 years in college would help shape and mold the course of the rest of my life. Or if I'm going to put this in a language of investment, let me put it this way. Wherever I invested my time, my energy, my attention, and my efforts for the next 4 years would help determine the course of the rest of my life. So you see, I had to make a choice. I had to choose where I was going to invest myself and hope that my choice or the choices that I made while I was in college would be wise choices. Let me ask you guys a question. As you're here at Biola, as you're students at Biola, where are you investing yourself? Where are you investing your time? And where are you investing your energy? Where are you investing your attention? Where are you investing your efforts? As you're here at Biola, where are you investing yourself? And finally, what impact might those investments that you make have on your life? How might they shape and mold the course of your life in the days to come? You know, in the scripture passage we're going to look at this morning, we enter into this ongoing conversation between a parent and a child. And specifically in this passage, it's a conversation between a father and a son. And in the same way that my father's statement caused me to think deeply about where I was going to invest my life, the father in our passage in Proverbs is advising his child on where and how to invest his life. So in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 13, beginning at verse 13, I'm reading from the New American Standard, the father says, "How blessed is the man who finds wisdom, and the man who gains understanding. For her profit is better than a profit of silver, and her gain is better than fine gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire compares with her." Essentially, in this passage, the parent is saying to the child in this passage, son, as you're looking at where and how to invest your life, as you're looking at where and how to invest your time and your efforts, as you're looking at where and how to invest your energy and your attention, son, I want to let you know that your wisest investment, your greatest investment is to invest in wisdom. Your wisest investment is to invest in wisdom. You know, wisdom, which in Proverbs is the ability to properly apply God's ways to everyday life. Wisdom is more valuable than anything else you might want, but it doesn't come easy. In that passage, notice that it said, "Blessed is the man or the woman who finds wisdom." And the word that's used for finds in this passage, the word that's used for finds in verse 13, implies an aggressive search on the part of the one who finds it. It literally means, guys, to reach out and to grasp something and take hold of it. To give you another picture of it, it's the same verb that is used in Proverbs 18:22, where the writer of the proverb says, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing." It's something that requires an aggressive search. It's a pursuit. It's a chasing after something that requires your time and your efforts and your energy and your attention. So essentially the father says to the child, he says, look, your wisest investment, your wisest pursuit is to invest in and to chase after wisdom. Devote your time and your effort and your energy and your attention to gaining wisdom. So at this point, you might be asking, well, why? Why should I invest myself in chasing after wisdom? What is it about wisdom that makes it worth chasing? Well, I'm glad you asked that question this morning. Because you see, the father in this passage says that we should invest in wisdom because wisdom is more valuable than anything else that we might desire. Again, at the end of verse 15, the father says, nothing you desire compares with wisdom. Nothing that you desire compares with her. And so then the Father goes on and he proceeds to just really give 3 reasons why wisdom is more valuable than anything else that we might desire. And the first reason that the Father gives the Son, the first reason he says is that wisdom will provide for you. Wisdom will provide for you. The Father says in verses 14 and 15 that wisdom's profit is better than silver, and her gain is better than gold. And the reason why he says this is because wisdom will provide silver and will provide gold and will provide much more for those who gain wisdom. In the second half of verse 16 in that same passage, the Father says of wisdom, in her left hand are riches and honor. In her left hand are riches and honor. In other words, the Father is saying, look, wisdom is more valuable than wealth because the reward of wisdom is wealth. Wisdom is more valuable than wealth because the reward of wisdom is wealth. And not only wealth, but also wisdom will also provide honor. Honor, a positive influence, a positive weight within society, prestige within a society. You know, one aspect of wisdom is skill. And Proverbs chapter 22, verse 29 states, do you see someone skilled in their work? They will stand before kings. Wisdom says, look, pursue me, and I will give you both wealth and honor. Pursue me, and I will give you both wealth and honor. Guys, why chase after the outcome when you can really have the source? Why chase after wealth? Why chase after prestige when you can have the source of both, which is wisdom? Wisdom says, look, if you gain me, in her left hand are riches and honor. That is my reward for those who gain me. In other words, the Father says you should invest yourself in chasing after wisdom because wisdom will provide for you. But there's a second reason that the Father gives why we should invest ourselves in chasing after wisdom. And not only will wisdom provide for us, but the Father says we should chase after wisdom because wisdom will protect us. Wisdom will protect us. You know, in this same verse I was just referring to in verse 16, it's interesting to note that the riches and the honor are in wisdom's left hand. Wisdom's left hand. And in ancient Near Eastern culture, the less important hand is the left hand. But the more important hand is the right hand, the hand of power. Remember, Jesus is at the right hand of the Father. The right hand is the more important hand in ancient Near Eastern culture. And so the question then becomes, what is in wisdom's right hand? If riches and honor are in the left hand, what's in wisdom's right hand? Well, the passage tells us in verse 16, long life is in wisdom's right hand. Long life is in wisdom's right hand. You see, in that culture, life was more important than wealth. They understood that wealth could come and go, but a long life was more important than wealth in their culture. And indeed, much of the rest of this chapter in Proverbs 3, if you get a chance when you go home, take a look at it. Go down through verses 23 through 26, verses 29 through 32. Much of the rest of the chapter, the majority of the rest of the chapter, focuses on life and issues of life. And as we talk about long life here, where it says long life is in wisdom's right hand, as we talk about life, we're not just talking about longevity. We're not just talking about length of life, but we're also talking about quality of life. In other words, we're talking about life as God intended it. Life as God intended it. You know, the Father sums it up. He sums it up beginning in verse 17. And in verse 17, the Father says about wisdom, he says, her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life. Don't miss that. She's a tree of life to those who take hold of her. And happy are all who hold her fast. a tree of life. That brings back to mind the imagery that we have from Genesis, the tree of life, which was in the Garden of Eden. And then when you move on to Revelation, once again, the tree of life, which will be in the New Jerusalem. And so you've got this concept of the tree of life. And you had it, and we lost it in Genesis, and we're going to gain it again in Revelation. But in between, the writer of the proverb is saying, look, wisdom will be your tree of life throughout this life. Wisdom will be your tree of life while you are living in this time, the time in between the times, the time between Eden and New Jerusalem, the time between Eden and new heavens and new earth. In between the time, wisdom will be your tree of life, which will allow you to live life as God intended it while living here on this earth. But not only does this passage talk about wisdom as giving the tree of life, but it talks about in terms of long life, it says all of her paths are peace. All of her paths are literally shalom. You know, shalom has been described as right relationships with God and right relationships with others. You know, guys, wealth is nice. And prestige or notoriety is nice. But let me ask you a question. What good is wealth and prestige without wisdom? What good is it to have wealth and to have notoriety and to have prestige without having wisdom? You see, wealth without wisdom often leads to greed. And prestige or notoriety without wisdom can become narcissistic ambition. Hey, look at me. Reality shows, anybody? Anybody ever watch any of those? Wealth without wisdom leads to greed, and prestige without wisdom can lead to narcissistic ambition. So let me put it to you this way. What good is wealth if you're constantly having to look over your shoulder and worry about who might be coming after you because of what you have to do to obtain that wealth? I was looking at an article the other day. It was an interesting article about in Dallas area, a wealthy area of Dallas, there was this shocking murder that took place. And as they dug deeper into the shocking murder that took place, they were wondering what's going on, because the guy that was murdered seemed to be an upstanding citizen and an upstanding businessman. But as they dug deeper into who this guy was, they found out that this guy was a major kingpin of a drug cartel who was fleeing all of his enemies and moved into Dallas to try to hide. He seemed to be an upstanding, upright citizen. He had wealth. He had prestige. He was known in society. But eventually, because of what he did to get that wealth, it caught up with him. What is wealth without wisdom? What is it? What good is wealth if you're constantly having to look over your shoulder and worry about who might be coming after you because of what you had to do to obtain that wealth? You know, in the same way, what good is prestige? What good is notoriety if it comes at the expense of your relationships with others? There's an old saying, and that saying is the same people that you pass on the way up, you're also going to pass on the way down. What good is prestige and notoriety and honor if it comes at the expense of your relationship with others? Prestige without wisdom becomes narcissistic ambition. It's all about me. But a final question, not only what good is wealth if you constantly have to look over your shoulder, and not only what good is prestige if it comes at the expense of your relationship with others, but what good is either wealth or prestige if God is not pleased with you? What good is it? You know, Jesus said in Luke 12:15 to some men who wanted him to mediate a dispute over their inheritance, Jesus said, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. For not even when one has an abundance does life consist of his possessions. And then he continued on sharing this parable, and he shared this parable about a rich man with many storage spaces for his wealth. And as he's sharing this parable, Jesus says that God says to the rich man who has all of this wealth stored up, God says to the man, you fool. That's the opposite of wisdom, guys. The opposite of wisdom is foolishness. He says, you fool, this very night Your soul is required of you. And now, who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. The father says to the son, son, you should invest yourself in chasing after wisdom, because wisdom will not only provide for you, but wisdom will protect you. Wisdom will provide wealth and honor, but wisdom will protect you, and so that when you gain your wealth and honor, you do not lose long life in the process. But there's a final reason that the father says that we should invest in wisdom. The final reason he says that we should invest in chasing after wisdom. He said, not only will wisdom provide for you, not only will wisdom protect you, but the father says, son, you need to invest in chasing after wisdom, because wisdom will have an impact that is greater than you. Wisdom will have an impact that is greater than you. If you travel just a little bit further with me in our text and move on beyond verse 18, and we come to Proverbs verse 19 and 20 in Proverbs chapter 3, and in that passage, the father switches tones and he says to the child, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding, he established the heavens. By his knowledge, the deeps were broken up, and the skies drip with dew. You see, guys, as we look at this passage, one of the things we realize is that God didn't just keep God's wisdom for God's self. God didn't just keep God's wisdom for himself, but instead, God used his wisdom to create and to have an impact on others. Now, if God used wisdom in this way, if God used wisdom to create and to have an impact on others, shouldn't we do the same? Likewise, if you remember the beginning of this book, if you remember from a few weeks ago, you probably noticed this, the beginning of the book of Proverbs is attributed to Solomon. It says the Proverbs of Solomon. But if you remember a little bit of your Bible story, Solomon gained his wisdom directly from God. Because God came to Solomon and said, because of your father David, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to grant you a request. What is your request? And Solomon asked for wisdom, and God granted him that request for wisdom. But here's the interesting piece. God granted Solomon's request for wisdom because when Solomon asked for wisdom, and if you look back at 1 Kings 3, 9 through 13, and 2 Chronicles 1, 10 through 12, when Solomon asked God for wisdom, he asked God for wisdom in order to govern God's people wisely. Solomon said, Lord, I'm not just asking wisdom for myself. I'm not just asking for you to give me wisdom so I can be wise, but he says, Lord, I'm asking for wisdom so I can govern your people wisely. And the scriptures let us know that God was pleased with this. And he said, because you didn't ask for yourself, because you didn't ask for riches, because you didn't ask for notoriety, because you didn't ask for honor, because you didn't ask just for something that would be for you, God says, guess what? I'm answering your request and I'm giving you everything you didn't ask for. God said, I'm going to give you wisdom, but I'm also going to give you wealth, and I'm going to give you honor, I'm going to give you prestige in such a way that no king before you and no king after you will ever be like you ever again. You see, guys, wisdom is not just for us. Wisdom is not just for our needs. It's not just for our wants. Wisdom is not just for our desires. Let me break it down a little bit further. Wisdom is not just for us to be able to graduate and go out and get a good job and make money and get a nice house and everything else. It's not just about us. But wisdom is meant to have an impact that is greater than we are. Wisdom is meant to have an impact that is greater than us. You know, this year at Biola, our chapel theme is abound. Abound. This concept of an overflowing, almost limitless growth. It comes from Philippians, where it talks about abounding in love with knowledge and with all discernment. You know, knowledge and discernment are two of the aspects of wisdom. And if we are truly going to invest ourselves in chasing after wisdom, if we're truly going to abound in wisdom, then we need to expect wisdom to have an impact that is greater than us. You know, Dr. Cornel West, who spoke at Biola last spring along with Dr. Robert George. Dr. West was recently interviewed on 60 Minutes. Now, Dr. West, I don't know how many of you guys know this, Dr. West is a smart man. He's a smart man. While he was in elementary school, it was discovered that he has an IQ of 168. He graduated magna cum laude from Harvard undergrad in 3 years. He was the first African American to earn a PhD in philosophy from Princeton. And he has served as a professor at Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and the University of Paris. One of his assistants talked about the fact that he was researching some materials for Dr. West, and when Dr. West talked to him about trying to find the materials, he said Dr. West quoted from memory the footnote and the specific page of the book, as well as the title and the chapter of each book that he wanted the footnotes from. Dr. West is a smart man. But yet, when on this 60 Minutes show, when he was asked about smart people, and when he was asked about being smart himself, Dr. West said this. He said, I've never been impressed by smartness. He said, I've never been impressed by smartness. He said, Adolf Hitler was smart. I'm not impressed by that. He said, if anything should be smart, he said, let the phones be smart. Get it? Smartphones, phones be smart. He said, if anything should be smart, let the phones be smart. But he said, instead, he said, I want to be wise. That blew me away. A man with an IQ of 168, a man who has accomplished all these things, he said, instead of being smart, I want to be wise. And then he continued on and talking about that. He said, I want the courage to be able to love others. I want the courage to be able to sacrifice for others. I want to be wise. Guys, there are a bunch of smart people in our world. There are a bunch of wealthy people in our world. And there are even a bunch of prestigious and famous people in our world. But how many wise people do we have in our world? As you're here at Biola, what are you investing in? What are you chasing after? The writer of Proverbs says to us, look, when you're chasing after something, when you're investing in something, your wisest investment is to invest in wisdom. Because chasing after wisdom is what matters most.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.